The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has spiraled into an unprecedented catastrophe, with each passing day adding a grim new chapter to the suffering of its people. As of July 2025, the situation has moved beyond a state of emergency into a prolonged agony defined by widespread death, destruction, and the systematic erosion of human dignity. The conflict, which ignited following the attacks of October 7, 2023, has inflicted a staggering toll on the civilian population. The very fabric of society is unraveling under the immense pressure of constant bombardment, displacement, and a blockade that has choked off the essentials of life for millions of trapped residents who have nowhere safe to go. The numbers alone paint a stark and devastating picture of the war's impact. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, the number of Palestinians killed has now climbed to at least 58,026, with an additional 138,520 people wounded. These figures represent not just statistics, but entire families erased, futures extinguished, and a generation scarred by trauma. On the other side of the conflict, the initial attacks on Israel resulted in the deaths of approximately 1,139 people, with more than 200 individuals taken captive into Gaza. The relentless cycle of violence that has ensued continues to claim lives daily, leaving a trail of grief that stretches across the entire region. Recent escalations have only intensified the horror for those on the ground. A particularly brutal 24-hour period leading up to July 9, 2025, saw over 100 Palestinians killed in a series of Israeli strikes that targeted a wide range of civilian locations. These sites included schools that were being used as shelters for displaced families, local cafes where people gathered in a desperate search for normalcy, and most alarmingly, designated aid distribution sites. Such attacks not only swell the casualty count, but also deepen the psychological terror, making it clear that no place is truly safe from the reach of the ongoing military operations that continue to pound the besieged enclave. This relentless assault has pushed Gaza's essential services to the brink of total collapse. The healthcare system, a critical lifeline for the wounded, is in its final throes. Nasser Hospital, the last major functioning medical facility in southern Gaza, issued a dire warning on July 9 that it was in its final hours due to a critical lack of fuel needed to power its generators and life-saving equipment. Overwhelmed with a constant influx of casualties, doctors and nurses work in impossible conditions, a testament to their dedication, but also a symbol of a system that has been systematically dismantled by the conflict, leaving the sick and injured with almost no hope of receiving adequate care. The specter of famine now looms over the entire Gaza Strip, where hunger has been weaponized into a silent, devastating killer. Aid organizations have issued stark warnings that 500,000 people are actively starving, while the entire population of over 2 million is facing a severe risk of famine. The desperation has become so acute that simple acts like waiting for food have become deadly endeavors. A tragic and horrifying pattern has emerged where starving Palestinians seeking humanitarian assistance are being killed by Israeli forces. The death toll from these incidents has now tragically surpassed 800 people, with families losing loved ones while they were merely trying to secure a bag of flour or a container of water. The violence at aid distribution points has become terrifyingly routine, transforming areas of hope into scenes of carnage. Since late March 2025 alone, at least 400 aid seekers have been killed, and more than 3,000 have been wounded in such attacks. In one horrific incident on June 17, Israeli military drones and artillery strikes killed at least 59 Palestinians in Khan Yunis as they attempted to access food supplies. Eyewitnesses described a scene of chaos and terror at an intersection where people were awaiting flour trucks, with at least 45 of the deaths occurring at that single location. These repeated attacks deter people from seeking aid, forcing them to choose between the risk of being shot and the certainty of starvation. Recent Israeli airstrikes have continued this disturbing trend of targeting areas where civilians gather for basic necessities. On July 9, a strike near a water distribution point killed at least 10 people, another grim example of how access to even the most fundamental resource for survival has become a life-threatening activity. Palestinian witnesses consistently report that Israeli forces fire directly into the crowds of hungry people, while the Israeli military often claims it only fires warning shots at individuals who are perceived as a threat to their troops. This discrepancy in narratives does little to comfort the families who are left to mourn their relatives, killed while pursuing the basic human need for food and water. The perspective of local residents is one of profound fear and hopelessness. Families who have been displaced multiple times now live in sprawling tent cities, such as the one in the designated safe zone of Al-Mawasi, where hundreds of thousands are crammed together with scarce access to clean water or sustenance. A displaced mother from northern Gaza shared her daily struggle. Every day is a gamble. Do we risk going to the aid point and getting shot, or do we stay in the tent and watch our children grow weaker from hunger? There are no good choices here. We are being starved, and the world is just watching it happen. Her words echo the sentiment of countless others trapped in this man-made disaster. The delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza is fraught with immense challenges and dangers, creating a bottleneck that prevents life-saving supplies from reaching those who need them most. Aid agencies point to a combination of severe Israeli restrictions on entry points, a breakdown of civil order within Gaza, and the active targeting of aid convoys and distribution sites. Even when trucks manage to cross into the territory, their journey is perilous. Desperate and starving crowds, driven by sheer survival instinct, often swarm the convoys and seize supplies before they can reach designated warehouses for organized distribution. This chaos, born of desperation, further complicates the efforts of humanitarian workers trying to ensure equitable access to the limited aid available. In an attempt to manage the distribution, a new system was introduced in May 2025, involving U.S. contractors and a group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. This system operates out of 4 fenced-off sites located within Israeli-declared military zones. However, this initiative has drawn sharp criticism from the United Nations, which has called for the system to be halted immediately, citing the extreme danger posed to civilians who must enter active combat zones to collect aid. The controversy deepened after the GHF paused its deliveries, accusing Hamas of attacking a bus carrying its aid workers, an incident that reportedly killed at least 5 people and highlighted the complex dangers faced by all parties involved in the aid effort. Aid workers on the ground describe an environment of constant fear and frustration. They are not only witnessing the horrific scale of human suffering firsthand, but are also risking their own lives to provide assistance. International and local humanitarians have been killed in targeted strikes, and their movements are severely restricted by the ongoing military operations. One aid worker with an international NGO stated, "We feel completely powerless. We have warehouses full of supplies just a few kilometers away, but we cannot get the security guarantees needed to move them safely. Our convoys are either denied access or attacked. We are being prevented from doing our job, and the price is being paid in human lives." The official perspective from the United Nations is one of deep alarm. UN officials have repeatedly condemned the obstacles to humanitarian access, labeling them a violation of international law. They argue that the only way to avert a full-blown famine is for Israel to open all land crossings, guarantee the safety of aid workers and civilians, and facilitate the movement of supplies throughout the entire Gaza Strip. The killing of medical personnel, such as the renowned cardiologist Dr. Marwan al-Sultan, in an area Israel had designated as safe, further underscores the UN's position that declarations of safety are meaningless without a genuine commitment to protecting civilian lives and infrastructure on the ground. The violence and impunity that characterize the conflict in Gaza have found echoes in the occupied West Bank, where tensions have escalated dramatically. The atmosphere of hostility has been tragically highlighted by the case of Saifullah Musaleh, an American Palestinian citizen. His family reports that he was brutally beaten to death by a group of Israeli settlers, a stark illustration of the growing settler violence that often goes unpunished. The family is now pleading for a U.S. investigation into his killing, hoping to find justice and draw international attention to the deteriorating security situation for Palestinians living under occupation, a reality that exists in parallel to the war raging in Gaza. This incident is not isolated but part of a broader pattern of increased Israeli military raids and settler aggression across the West Bank. In areas like the Dahishi refugee camp and the village of Kafr Kadum, Israeli forces have conducted frequent operations, deploying sound bombs and tear gas against residents, further inflaming an already volatile situation. These actions contribute to a climate of fear and oppression, demonstrating that the conflict's impact extends far beyond Gaza's borders. The international community's focus remains largely on Gaza, But the simmering violence in the West Bank represents another front in the long-standing crisis, threatening to erupt into wider conflict at any moment. Amidst the bloodshed, diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire remain stalled. Negotiations continue, but a significant point of contention is Hamas's demand for a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, a condition Israel has so far rejected. As a potential gesture, Hamas has offered to release 10 living Israeli captives during a temporary truce, a small glimmer of hope for the families of those still held. As of June 2025, it was believed that militants held 53 hostages, but there are grave fears that less than half of them may still be alive after months of devastating conflict, adding another layer of tragedy and urgency to the talks. Ending the immense suffering in Gaza requires a fundamental shift from all parties involved. A meaningful and lasting ceasefire is the most immediate and critical step to halt the killing and allow for a massive, unimpeded surge of humanitarian aid. This must be followed by a genuine political process that addresses the root causes of the conflict, including the decades-long occupation and the blockade of Gaza. International pressure, particularly from influential nations like the United States, is essential to ensure compliance with international law and to hold all actors accountable for their actions. Without justice and a viable political horizon, the cycles of violence will inevitably continue, and the people of Gaza will remain trapped in this devastating humanitarian nightmare.